Thank you. First of all, let me just say, Governor Hutchison, thank you for being here. I know you have a very busy schedule, and I know you probably would rather be a lot of other places than here this morning. So we appreciate you being here to answer some questions. Before we say anything, before you do anything else, Coach Air, do you have anything to say? We do need a motion to accept the minutes of the last meeting. So I have a motion. All those in favor? All right. Governor, I understand that you have an opening statement that you would like to make before we begin questioning. So you are recognized to make that opening statement.
Thank you, Senator Stubblefield, Representative Fite. Thank you for the invitation to speak on my decision to support the resettlement of a limited number of refugees from war-torn countries into our state. First, it is important to understand who qualifies as a refugee. A refugee is not someone who crosses our borders illegally or someone who enters our country and claims asylum. A refugee coming to America is not an illegal entry. A refugee often waits years to be authorized to come to the United States legally, and the refugee is vetted and has more security checks than any other type of immigrant who comes to the United States. The vetting process includes biographic and interagency security checks, Homeland Security interviews, fingerprint scans, and biometric security checks, and a medical exam. Once screened and selected, the refugee goes through a cultural education program by the United States. Now let me take you back in time. 4 years ago, information was floating around the state that thousands of Syrian refugees were coming to Arkansas. Despite the welcoming nature and compassion of Arkansans, I was concerned about security and the lack of information that was available to me as governor. I opposed a mass relocation of Syrian refugees because I did not have the information to give confidence to my decision. For these reasons, I issued a statement that I oppose the mass relocation of Syrian refugees to Arkansas. Some of you have asked, well, what has changed? The answer, a lot has changed. The Trump administration has made a number of changes. They have limited the number of refugees nationwide to 18,000, with likely fewer than 50 coming to Arkansas in 2020. Second, the priorities for refugee resettlement have changed, from focus on balancing geographic regions to placing a priority on those suffering religious persecution and those who have cooperated with the United States in the war against terrorism. The vetting and security checks have been dramatically increased, and very importantly, the state and local governments have been included on the decisions and have been provided essential information that was previously unavailable. As a result of these changes, I've been briefed on the security checks by my former colleagues at the Department of Homeland Security. I have closely examined the process both at the Department of State and with the sponsoring Arkansas Resettlement Agency. Based upon this due diligence, I have confidence in the high standard of security checks and that the incoming refugees will have the community support needed to get jobs, to pay taxes, and to be assimilated into our American culture and way of life. As a result, I communicated by letter to Secretary Pompeo Arkansas's willingness to accept refugees, and of course this took also the approval of Washington County, which I'll reference. My authorization is until December 31, 2020. My administration will continue to monitor the assimilation of the refugees, their employment, and their compliance with our laws. At the end of the year, I will advise the Department of State as to whether Arkansas will continue to participate in the program. I certainly hope that will be the case because the refugees settled to date have been successful. In fact, 98% of refugees become self-sufficient within 90 to 180 days of arrival. And so some of you have asked, well, who are they and where do they come from? The refugees in the resettlement program are fleeing persecution or other hardship in their home country. For many, such as Watada Mwenda and his family leaving the Democratic Republic of Congo literally made the difference between life and death. In fact, before they fled, Mr. Mwanda's son and daughter-in-law were murdered, and he was kidnapped and held hostage until he escaped and sought refuge. Mr. Mwanda was settled in Fayetteville. Many of the refugees come from African nations that are embroiled in conflict or war. Some come from countries such as Iraq and Afghanistan, where they are at risk because they have cooperated with U.S. officials. Now let me introduce a special guest, Ms. Louisia Akili Mali. Ms. Louisia Akili Mali. Please stand if you would, please. She and her husband fled the Democratic Republic of Congo in 2000 because of the Civil War. They fled to Kenya, where they waited for the next 18 years to be resettled. But while they waited, they made a difference in the refugee camp. Lucia opened a small grocery store, and her husband, Kalula, planted a Baptist church. About 10 years into their time in Kenya, the Kenyan authorities reached out to them about fostering a pair of Congolese girls who had just arrived to the country unaccompanied. Their parents had been killed back in the DRC, the Congo, and they made their way to Kenya with a group of other refugees. Kalulu and Lucia agreed to take them in and adopt them as their own. They were all resettled in Arkansas in 2018 and have continued to work hard and have become a part of our community. Lucia has recently completed training as a certified nursing assistant and is working at a senior care facility. Oh, yes. Her husband works for a manufacturing company in Springdale. Her oldest son attends NWAC, Northwest Arkansas Community College, and is hoping to transfer to the university next year to complete a bachelor degree in engineering. They are active members of Cross Church in Springdale. I also wanted to introduce two additional ones. Hamayun Abdullah from Afghanistan. Hamayun, would you stand, please? Thank you. He is here, and I asked him why he is here, why he became a refugee, and the answer was because he worked for years in Afghanistan with United States authorities, including the USAID. He was at risk, he went to a safe house, and he became a refugee to the United States of America. He lost his son because of his commitment to the United States of America. And then we have Manga Mukadama of the Congo. And Manga came here also from the Congo, in a very similar story that you've heard previously. But I want to welcome them here to this distinguished committee, and I know that you'll want to welcome them as well. Let me also introduce Emily Crane Lynn, the Resettlement Director for Canopy of Northwest Arkansas. And Emily, I understand Canopy, for some of those who might not be familiar with it, is associated with Lutheran Immigration Services and has a relationship with Catholic Charities as well. In 2017, they helped relocate 52 to Arkansas, in 1857 and 1954. In fiscal year 20, 5 have been resettled thus far. Now, some have inquired about the cost to our state. The simple answer is that the refugees find employment, pay taxes, and the cost-benefit analysis is a net plus for our state. In fact, there's a physical cost analysis through the Trump administration that President Trump requested that demonstrated nationwide that there's a net positive impact of $16.9 billion as a result of refugees paying taxes, employment, and their work. The transition support for the 54 refugees who resettled last year in Arkansas came from the federal government and private donations. No state dollars are involved in the refugee support. Most of these refugees find a job within 3 months. After 90 days, they can apply for the same public assistance that is available to any other person who is here legally. But as I said, 98% transition off within 90 to 180 days. They also are subject to the same qualifications and requirements, including a work requirement when that is for a particular benefit. Under President Trump's executive order, it is necessary also to have local community support. I'm pleased to say that Judge Joseph Wood of Washington County, along with the mayors of Springdale and Fayetteville, have submitted letters indicating their support and willingness to accept the refugees as they have in the past. At this time, the relocation will only take place in Washington County. And before I turn it over to questions, let me conclude by saying America was founded by immigrants, and through the years they have fought to preserve our freedom and made the United States the greatest country on earth. Arkansas is a welcoming state. We have benefited from Vietnamese refugees who fled communism and a war-torn country. Wherever they come from, we benefit from their energy, devotion to freedom, and we want them to be a part of the fabric of our nation, our future, and our state. If we say no to them, then we lose the talent, entrepreneurship, and humanity of those who love America. Yes, they can go elsewhere, but Arkansas will benefit from their presence. Security is foremost, but I have confidence in the security measures taken by this administration. Let's welcome Lucia and others who come here for all that America has to offer. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield for any questions from the committee.
Thank you, Governor. Governor, you did a radio interview, I think, a couple of weeks ago with Mr. Ellswick, I understand. And during that interview, one of the questions you were asked was, where do the refugees come from? And I think your statement was, it has been our experience that these refugees come from certain locations.
Can you have a breakdown for me?
Do you have a more specific answer to that than it's been our experience that these refugees come from certain locations in Africa or the Middle East or even South America?
Well, I can give you a very specific breakdown as to where the refugees came from in terms of the last 3-4 years that we have been brought here to Arkansas. Now, the reason you look at 2020, you base it upon history as to where they come from, but I can't say for certain how many is going to come from the DRC, how many come from African nations, how many will come from Iraq, out of the less than 50 that will come here this next year. There's that one sheet I'm speaking of. That one sheet. So Canopy has settled refugees from the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, Liberia, Rwanda, Iran, Iraq, and Afghanistan. And also we had some from Colombia. There's a sheet that has a specific number for each year. Yeah. And so I think you can, based upon the experience, that we'll see a similar pattern this coming year, because the Department of State likes to bring those in here to different areas that have support, adequate support, and they feel a part of a community.
So, and there's no, as far as the demographics of this group of 50 to 70 refugees, do you know what the demographics of that group is, who they're made up of? In regard to age, in regard to families, do those refugees have families that are already here? Because in most cases, many times refugees already have family and friends in the United States.
Many of them are family units. Those are the ones I've recited. There's different circumstances that refugees come. Some are individuals, some have families with them. And so the refugees, the key thing is that in the process, they are first put into a resettlement or a refugee camp ordinarily, in which in some instances they say 18 years, but on the average 2 to 3 years in refugee settlement camp. And then the High Commission on Refugees will allocate some to different countries, and some will be allocated to the United States. That's when the vetting process starts. And that vetting process I've already outlined, And then the Department of State, once they've been vetted, will determine where they have the best opportunity for success. They will assign them to different states. And so I can't tell you who will be assigned to us this next year, but the Department of State has indicated to Canopy that it will be fewer than 50, and that we can be assured that they will come in a similar fashion as families, individuals that have been vetted in previous years. They did provide me with the sheet that gives the specific numbers, and I'll just take last year. We had 8 from Afghanistan, 5 from Liberia, 4 from Rwanda, 1 from Iraq, 1 from Iran, and then we had the rest, which looks like about 25 to 30 from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. That totals 54 arrivals in FY19. I think that gives you a good flavor as to what's ahead. In FY20, we've received 5 from Colombia, and that's the extent of what we've received thus far in FY20.
Would you agree, Governor, would you agree that even with this enhanced vetting that has been put in place, and I've studied the enhanced vetting process that the federal government has put in place in regard to refugees, would you agree that even with that type of vetting, there's always a possibility that there's someone who could slip through who would be a national security threat or a public safety threat to our country?
It's not any different than you know, people who are granted visas that come to our country. We're a free country. We're human beings, and certainly you can. While I have confidence in the vetting process and the checks that have been made, you know, there's never a guarantee that one of the 150 that have come here over the last few years might violate a law of some kind. I mean, that's always a potential.
Would you also agree that refugees allowed to enter the United States represent a cost not only to the U.S. government, which, you know, a lot of times I've heard statements saying, you know, well, these are federal funds. We have a tendency sometimes to distinguish between federal funds and state funds. All those funds are still taxpayer dollars. I mean, Washington money is Arkansas money, because without Arkansas taxpayer dollars, the federal government would not have the funds they have to do the programs and implement the programs they have. So those dollars really represent Arkansas taxpayer funds. And when you take into consideration the fact that, and I have a good friend who's, and you do too, you know this lady real well, Representative Kathy, former Representative Kathy Webb, who was head of the Arkansas Hunger Alliance. And when you consider the fact that Arkansas has 1 out of 4 children who go to bed hungry every night, and we are ranked as one of the top poor states in the country, can you understand the reaction that the public would have when they read about refugees being allowed to enter and the benefits that they are being given? They are also eligible for other assistance and services through Health and Human Services. In addition to that, they also are eligible for mainstream federal means tested public benefits, as well as assistance they might receive under state law, even assistance otherwise that's unavailable to our own citizens. And in my community, we have veterans who have fought for this country, for the freedoms that we enjoy in this country, who are going without needed assistance, and yet we take in individuals from other countries and provide them with financial assistance that we don't even give our own citizens. Can you understand that?
Well, Senator Stubblefield, first of all, I disagree with you. Started off the question by saying, is there a cost to us? And as President Trump initiated through an executive order early on, as he was considering the issue of refugees, he asked the State Department, Human Services, and other agencies to determine the net cost of refugees to the United States of America. And I'd be happy to share this with you, but the physical cost was analyzed with expenditures and revenues. And again, the conclusion of the Trump administration was that the refugees and their non-refugee spouses and children were a net physical benefit overall estimated at $16.9 billion. And so, yes, I believe that, again, to my statement, it's a positive thing that we bring immigrants to our country, that they benefit to us in terms of their work, their paying taxes. And the veterans that you mentioned, absolutely, they have the same access to benefits as any citizen would have or any legal resident of the United States. So it's a net plus for us. But the veterans, I think you talk to any veteran who served in Iraq or Afghanistan, and they would say, don't leave someone behind who cooperated and supported our United States military that's at risk.
Hey, could we, the audience, could you hold down your applause? I agree with that too. I agree with that too, if that is the case, Governor. But are you absolutely certain that is the case, that these refugees that are coming in actually assisted our military?
Again,
can you verify that beyond a shadow of a doubt?
I have verified that with the acting secretary of the Department of Homeland Security and with Secretary Pompeo's Department of State. Because they changed the priorities. I couldn't vouch for that under the previous administration. I can vouch for that because they have represented to me that these are the priorities in relocating refugees to the United States.
Okay. All right, we're going to go on to some other members who have questions. Seat 92, Senator Garner, you're recognized. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Governor. Per President Trump's executive order, in order to have their placements of refugees at a location, it requires the consent of the states and locality. From the executive order section 2, it says that the consent must be in writing. The written consent must be released publicly. Further, the same section, the consent must be given or the refugees cannot be placed at a location. So the executive order creates an opt-in situation instead of an opt-out, which means unless there is written consent from a location where the refugees could be resettled, they cannot locate there. So President Trump didn't just give this decision to the governor, he gave his decisions to the local governments as well, per that kind of conservative principle of the best kind of government is local government. We're seeing this in other states. In North Carolina, some cities and counties have accepted refugees. In Tennessee, roughly 1/3 of the 95 counties decided against accepting refugees, going so far as to pass a resolution where they said they would not accept refugees. I think that last part is important for people listening here and people who may be listening at home. You still have a decision to be made in this process. I know you said that the Washington County judge gave you a letter of consent. I have not seen that letter of consent. I don't know if anybody else has. Per the State Department's website, it's required that that consent be listed there. They have Arkansas's consent letters. They have other consent letters from cities and counties. They do not have any from Washington County, Springdale, or Fayetteville. But besides that, if you look at what the law actually says, the refugees can settle not just in Springdale and Fayetteville. Per the law, they can be within 100 miles of Fayetteville. Now, I did an informal map, and just looking at it, that looks like that's a dozen or more different counties. It goes all the way to Bull Shoals, Flippin, Mountain View, or Mountain Home, excuse me, Fort Smith, Clarksville, Russellville. If you look at it, it seems that we have to get acceptance from each one of these different county and locations. So here's my question. First, what is the letter of consent that we got from Washington County, Springdale, and Fayetteville? Secondly, what is your administration going to do to ensure that no refugees are placed in the counties that not either actively accept them or decide not to accept them? Because the people here still can call their local county officials and decide whether they want to make this decision or not. So what are the steps we are taking?
The letters from the Washington County judge, Joseph Woods, and the letters from the mayor of Springdale and the mayor of Fayetteville is a matter of record. It was sent to Secretary Pompeo. I'll be happy to furnish those to you. And so that means that they have communicated pursuant to the executive order that they're willing to accept the relocation of refugees. The Canopy, Northwest Arkansas, that's why they're there. They're working with those communities to relocate the refugees that are assigned by the Department of State. Now, that goes to those cities. That's as simple as it can get. Now, there is a freedom of movement in the United States of America. That's one of the great freedoms that we have. And so a refugee is here legally, and a refugee can decide that he's working for Walmart, and Walmart wants to transfer them to Michigan. They have the freedom to go to Michigan to work. And so there is freedom of movement. So the initial requirement is that the city that they're going to be initially relocated to has approved. And so, Senator Garner, in your area, there's not going to be initial relocation of refugees in your area or Senator Subtlefield's area. Now, they might go down there to Mount Magazine sometime because we have the freedom of movement in the United States of America. And, but they're going to be relocated to the cities that have signed off on their approval.
Well, I think that's the question, Governor. So it appears to me that unless a county government, and this is what it says on the Department of State's website, actively writes the consent, that they cannot be relocated there. So while you might have consent in Washington County, what everybody here needs to know is if you have an issue or you support it or don't support it, call your local county government, because unless they give that letter and it's posted on the Secretary of Department's website, I believe does not have the legal authority to resettle people there. You still have a decision in this process. Thank God President Trump gave us another checks and balance in order to make sure we do this properly. Thank you, Governor.
Yeah, and thank you, Senator. And please be assured that let's educate our communities. Yes, they have the right. If they want to pass a resolution, we don't want to accept refugees, they can do that. But it's a little bit irrelevant because the relocation intent is for Springdale, Washington County area. There's no intent to relocate any refugees in other parts of the state.
Senator Rice, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Governor. Appreciate you being here today. Since your latest trip to China, your staff released a response to troublesome revelations that multiple Chinese companies who received substantial grants from the state tax dollars, were also clients of the Hutchison Law Firm. And while illegalities has not been alleged, ethical optics have been concerning to many people. This has led to some skepticism of your administration regarding foreign interest, and that's some that has bled over in this today. When I first started receiving contacts after your announcement, I think on eve of Christmas Eve, legislators, as far as my knowledge, had not been contacted or let anybody be known. I feel like that it should have been known that legislators were going to be contacted about this to be able to answer questions, and we were not. The release that your staff released stated that the law group participates in international business and immigration work and assists in U.S. visa legal work. Does the Hutchison Law Group have working relations with the Canopy Group or any other groups that are engaged in refugee processing?
I have no association with my son's law firm. I can't speak to who their clients are. You can address that question with the Hutchison Law Group. I'm not aware of any connection with any of the issues surrounding this hearing.
One of your statements, Governor, I heard you say is my role as governor is to understand the public sentiment. You remember saying that recently?
Well, that's certainly one of my responsibilities.
I wrote it down. To have public knowledge will create public sentiment. and we weren't given that in advance of this. And again, some of this bleed over is maybe natural. Some of it is not factual. I didn't have factual answers for my constituents that contacted me. I said, I'll find out. And then as we went forward, we got some of that. So we are having cuts, as already been said, I'm not going to reiterate, in some programs for elderly and disability, and some proposed cuts that didn't go through. There's concern, Governor, and I think for public sentiment to be heard, people have to know about it. So while I appreciate the situation, we have some fantastic stories that you've brought today of success stories, and we want to be welcoming. I invite everybody to join relief efforts. I contribute to some that are international from reputable groups that help, want to help, not against that, but Governor, we need information. I would appreciate more time on this to let some of this flesh out. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Rice. Representative Ballinger, you're recognized for question. Who's in seat 20? 20. Okay, sorry, Megan. Representative Godfrey, you're
Thank you,
recognized.
Mr. Chair, and thank you, Governor, for being here. Thank you for your work in this matter. I am Louisa's state representative, so I'm very glad that she's here, and I'm glad to represent her. She lives in my neighborhood. Her children go to my daughter's elementary school, and I just wanted to name, too, that she's a part of the family literacy program at her school, that she takes time 4 days a week to learn English, to learn how to support her kids in American schools, and just wanted to congratulate her for that. And I know that a lot of her focus is community connection and cultural integration. Governor, would you say that that is reflective of the experience of most refugees who are coming to be resettled here in Arkansas?
Absolutely. Representative Godfrey, the issue of assimilation is very important, and we want them as Americans to be assimilated into our culture, to become understanding of our freedoms and our history and our culture and our education systems and our communities. They want that as well. It's full of challenges. Whenever you have language barriers, whenever you have cultural differences, a lot of challenges that are there. And that's why we're grateful for the support of the community, of the churches, to help them to overcome those challenges and barriers and to be assimilated. That's the ultimate objective we have, but I'm delighted that there is that strong church connection and support from the community for those refugees that are in your district.
Thank you, Governor. We're glad to welcome Lucia, you to our neighborhood, to our state. Also, Senator Garner, I have been in communication with my mayor, with the mayor of Springdale, and I have a copy of his letter if you'd like to see it. We can visit about that offline. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Representative Godfrey. Thank you. Speaking of assimilation and integration, Governor, one of my favorite shows when I was growing up as a kid was The Wizard of Oz. And I remember one of my favorite sayings in that movie was when Dorothy said, you know, Toto, I don't think we're in Kansas anymore. Every morning when I wake up and turn on the national news, sometimes I ask myself a question, am I still in the United States of America? Because I hear some of the craziest ideas, and I wonder where they're coming from. And the idea of assimilation, every refugee, whether it be a refugee or an immigrant coming into the United States, taking for granted the fact that you say they are assimilating, not all are assimilating. I don't think there's an individual sitting in this room today that doesn't agree with someone coming here through the legal process, and I understand the difference in refugees and illegal immigration. I don't think there's a person here who disagrees with the process of someone coming here legally through a process where they learn our language, they learn our customs, they learn that we are a constitutional republic, they learn that we have laws, and they do not come with the idea of setting up their own communities, establishing their own laws, their own culture, therefore vastly changing American culture. And I see that happening across the country to varying degrees, some in other parts more than here in the state of Arkansas. But I also see it in Northwest Arkansas. You have schools like in Springdale where they speak 46 different languages. You have schools that are stressed out in Northwest Arkansas. You have federal schools that I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, who have now made it a policy to not have anything that relates to Christmas. And also, they've disallowed any type of patriotic speeches or any patriotic material in the school. And I'm open, if someone could correct me, those things are not assimilating into our society as a constitutional republic country that was founded on Judeo-Christian principles. So that in itself troubles me a lot when it comes to, hey, could you please hold it down? Those things are troubling to me and a lot of the people that live within my Senate district and a lot of people in the state of Arkansas. Could you address that?
Well, we've had Italian immigrants come to the United States of America. In New York, they have the Italian district. In Arkansas, we have Town, and it is a source of cultural pride where the Zuppols and the Pinaldos, because those of a cultural heritage, they naturally like to live together and celebrate their Americanism, but also celebrate the fact that they are of Italian descent. You know, the Irish Americans love that culture, and so there's not anything unusual about having a cultural identity with where you came from, at the same time being as steadfast and loyal Americans as anyone that's been here since the Revolution. And it usually takes a generation. It takes time to assimilate and get over the language barriers. But that's what America has done successfully for 200 plus years. And, you know, just because we have challenges today doesn't mean we can't, we have to make sure that we have the right number. President Trump has made sure that instead of 100,000, it's down to 18,000 refugees. Can we successfully integrate 18,000 refugees in the United States of America? I think we can, and I think that's consistent with the greatest values of our country. Each of you are leaders in your community. You've got a choice to make. You can create fear or you can help resolve fear. I challenge you to help resolve fear, have the facts, and to talk about those. And I know that many of you are doing that. And, you know, I make tons of decisions every day affecting our state. I try to communicate as well as I can with the members of the General Assembly. I'll continue to try to do that. And Senator Rice, I want you all to have all the information that you need. Sometimes it's not a perfect system, but we try to communicate. This is an executive branch decision that I was called upon to make. I made that decision. I tried to communicate as much as we could. We'll always try to do it better. But Senator Stubblefield, you know, I'm a native Arkansan. I understand change, and I understand resistance to change. We're not changing the culture of Arkansas. We're just sharing the culture of Arkansas that those who also are troubled, coming from terrible circumstances, and I think we can embrace them.
All right, we have another question. Representative Whitaker, you have a question? Seat 23? 43. Okay, you're recognized. Representative Rye.
Thank you, Senator Stubblefield. Governor, good to see you this morning and glad you came, because actually we have had a lot of calls statewide pertaining to this, and I think that you're answering a lot of questions that we needed to know. But let me ask just one question, sir. From the history in the beginning of this program, have you ever had any record of any terrorists that have come from this?
No. All right, Mr. Chairman, you know that I have an engagement to go to. I appreciate the opportunity to testify before you, to answer questions. But with that, I'll ask permission to be excused.
Governor, thank you again for coming. We appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule. Thank you.